So Peter Singer, who is a utilitarian, argues that this should lead us to favor the recommendations of moral theories more closely. So in this balance between theories and intuitions, he argues that because of this evolutionary story that we can tell, um, it seems like we can explain why we have certain intuitions in a way that leads us to reject them. And so if we shouldn't trust our intuitions, then they can't be used to reject our moral theories anymore. So, for example, if utilitarianism produces a result that we find intuitive, we should look to reject our intuition and try and reevaluate our intuition rather than rejecting the moral theory. And Singer thinks that this is particularly good for utilitarianism as a theory, because a lot of the support for um, rival theories like deontology and Kantian ethics comes from the fact that utilitarianism is counterintuitive because of what it suggests that we can do morally. So utilitarianism famously says that in at least some cases, you can be permitted to do actions which look like they should be wrong um, intuitively. So, for example, throwing the person over the bridge, lying to people, killing people. None of these actions are intrinsically immoral for the utilitarian, um, in the way that they are for the Kantian deontologist. And Singer wants to argue that a lot of the reasons why people have found Kantian ethics to be convincing is because of these evolutionary intuitions. So imagine if you lived in a kind of tribal setting thousands of years ago. Um, the intuitions that you would evolve would likely be deontological, said Singer. Says Singer. So what he means by that is they would not admit for a lot of exceptions. So you'd have hard and fast moral rules, which say, you should never kill somebody. You can never permissibly lie. Um, and Singer goes further and says that is it any surprise that a lot of the codes of ethics that we find in religions, so such as the Ten Commandments within Christian ethics, are similar because having these hard and fast moral rules would be better for societies. But Singer wants to say that um, using these intuitions that we understandably have from our evolutionary past as a rebuttal to utilitarianism is argumentatively illegitimate. And this seems like a pretty strong argument from Singer, but we might worry that there's a more radical challenge here, because a lot of the arguments that people try and give for utilitarianism as a moral theory and moral theories in general seem to themselves be justified on the basis of intuitions. So if we think back to Bentham and Mill, a lot of the arguments that they give about why people ought to be utilitarians comes from suggesting that utilitarian principles are intuitive ways of encompassing all our intuitions. So there might be a real difficulty here if it looks like we can't trust our intuitions. How do we get ethics off the ground in the first place? Because it seems like theories have to come about as a secondary way of collating our intuitions into general principles. There might be a more radical challenge here that's worth investigating because if it seems like we invest heavily into these arguments about how our intuitions are unreliable, it might Singer wants to say that it should lead us to being more pro-theory ethicists, whereas there's a radical challenge here that it might lead us to stop being ethicists in effect at all, and embrace some kind of moral skepticism instead.